Wido says, thoughts on doing box squats rather than HGG squats reduce fatigue during rugby season and pre-season. So we have some conflicting thoughts on this between the two of us. There's some of the rare things we probably a third disagree with some of it.
So aside from box squats, and I've got to make a generalization here that Gerf isn't going to agree with, and that's why I'm saying it now before he gets to talk. Realistically, for almost every rugby player in the world, you can be squatting to within an inch or 3 inches of parallel on the high side of that. You want to be focusing on moving the barbell as quickly as possible with as much weight as humanly possible for you right now. And that's all that matters. That's all the large scale studies that have been done in rugby players and professional rugby players when they're looking at both making them stronger and faster, but also when looking at limiting ACL tears and general knee injuries over the course of a season. You will lose less time. So that the important marker for professional rugby players is losing like every time lost due to an injury. So every time you miss a game or every day of training missed, they'll measure those. The major factor for those is getting the squat to be as strong as possible. Doesn't matter how deep it is. It doesn't matter to a box. For a lot of people, using a box to make sure they're limiting that depth and just to make sure they're not crashing into the bottom position, using that box will reduce fatigue. It will allow you to squat heavier weights. And so for me, on the right-hand side of the Sika table, the correct side of the Sika table, box squats during season and out of season are applicable. Now, that being said, I have 2 rugby players on my books at the moment, and neither of them are box squatting. So take that with a pinch of salt. But in the idealist realms of the Sika Strength Rugby Academy, everyone squats kind of high, and some of them will squat to a box.
So there is one study which came out of, I think, the Leinster Academy or the Irish or this Institute of Sports, one of them.
The squats to parallel one.
Yeah, so
that's the Leinster one, yeah.
So they saw less injuries with their rugby players when they only squatted to just about parallel to a box. So my argument is...
That was the previously referenced study.
And I think their findings were correct for their athletes. My argument would be to, from the ground up principles, would be teach the younger athletes, especially in their teens, correct squatting bar form with a high bar or low bar, depending on their builds and their size and what position they're playing in. Teach them to squat to a pretty deep depth, but you'd be working on things like mobility, technique with the lifts. This requires a lot of time, a lot of addressing, a lot of understanding of how to get an athlete to that position. So I think I would bet if those same athletes that were involved in that study, who are all very, very good athletes, and the study I bet was very well done, and I bet their findings were correct for those athletes, but I bet if you had those athletes in their teens, especially their early teens, or even late teens, depending on what time you got them, and put them through maybe a better way of getting through to that squat position, getting quality high bar squats in, I bet you wouldn't have seen the same results for those athletes later in their career. So some of the benefits from that, those full depth squats, would be better tendon ligament resistance. So tendons require a lot of force, fascia requires a lot of speed to initiate changes in it. So if you're looking at like your fascial tissue or tendons and ligaments, they need high forces, something between less than or faster than 1 meter per second. They need like athletic endeavors. The velocities of chiropractic readjustments will actually do increase temporary range of motion, happen at 0.2 meters per second. So if you could get to a place, now this is obviously an ideal world, but if you could get to a place where you as an individual player could end up with great mobility and terrifically good looking high bar squats, I think you get a lot of benefit from those. But then I think there's more context on that. So that would be definitely in the preseason. And then I think a little mix of each of those in the on-season would be a little bit of mix of those. So you're staying loose, you're staying fast and fresh with your high bar squats at like 100 kilos or whatever it is, but your max is like 180 or whatever, you go by like a bar speed and how you feel on those particular sessions. But then you keep that force production high and you keep that heavy weight in certain parts of the season where you just go for those really heavy weights. And there's definitely benefits to this, where I think we've talked about this a couple of times before, where to a certain point, absolute weight, just a lot of weight, has a very positive effect on your organism. There's just a different effect on your organism that other things don't have. Changing other variables just won't have the same effect as a fuck ton of weight, because a fuck ton of weight is undeniable for your body to adapt to. For everybody, I don't care who you are, even if you're 200 kilos, half Torbjornsson, 300 kilos on your back is still pretty heavy. 300 kilos isn't something you're going to squat cold, isn't something you're going to do every day without massive issues. You know, that's something that does happen, and absolute weight does have unique positive benefits to it. And I think there is definitely for rugby, who I think on average is something like a car crash a game, or was it 2 or 3 car crashes? 3 car crashes a game is something, the physical forces that rugby players experience through pretty intense games. And I think one of the best ways of bulletproofing yourself for that kind of thing is just a shitload of heavy weight. And there's a shitload of heavy weight can be done very well and pretty safely on parallel box squats, you know. So I think there's a place for both of them, but I think there's probably the seat at the table for high bar full depth squats is probably missing in rugby, and that's probably just due to environmental demands. It's just really hard to coach a load of 25, 15-year-olds in a gym session, you know. That's unfortunately just the nature of that. But, and maybe a certain kind of deficit in knowledge in a little part of those otherwise great coaches' S&C stuff, you know, they just mightn't have
I think
that opportunity.
The other thing with that group of 15-year-olds is, due to the nature of rugby, the really strong rugby players, like front rowers, Porter, Ty Furlong, these kind of massive men, right? You're talking about at 18 years old squatting north of 250 kilos for reps. So it's
to
a box. But they're shifting massive amounts of weight, you know, and it is like, you'll see the All Blacks in a few of the videos we've done reviewing the All Blacks training. Really nice high bar squats. Lovely. Almost all of them are going so far below parallel. They're obviously finding huge success with that. They're an incredibly athletic team. It's obvious that the coaching pushes them in that direction, and it clearly works for them. They're one of the best rugby teams in the world. And myself and Garth do disagree on it, but it's like we both agree on the important things that people need to lift heavy quite frequently, and this is a tiny nuanced area of it. But that is the last thing I'd say is that these players who are very strong could realistically be at their strongest between the ages of 18 and 21.
But
that's for a few different reasons as well.
Yeah. What I'm saying though is what you actually do with your athletes. So
yeah,
but in practice,
yeah, what I do with mine,
is what I'm
yeah.
So Taylor Treading.